Great, I now welcome up the first speaker of the Affirmative team to open up today's debate.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. In today's debate, I've identified two pathways to victories, which will make up my two substantive point that will prove by the end of this debate. Firstly, we'll prove that China would do more harm than good in the long term for the country of Taiwan. And secondly, prove that in terms of providing relief for the earthquake, Taiwan is still able to do a sufficient job without China. And then my second speaker today's split will be on how accepting China's aid would create tension within the Taiwanese people. Okay, so firstly on some setup, what does Chinese assistance likely to look like if Taiwan was to accept the aid, right? This is like physical intervention. This looks like China directly flying out to Taiwan and taking part in this aid. This looks like having dominant within this process. This is likely because China is known for being like enthusiastic about control, right? And we've seen this previously in history. Some examples of this is like military troops coming over to lift bodies out of the buried terrain, and the military troops thus have incentive to be there for the protection. And second, this can look like sending over large amounts of doctors because they have the capacity to do so, right? But then secondly, now why did Taiwan reject China's assistance? This is firstly because of historical tension. Previously in the past, we see that Taiwan have fight for independence against a war with China, which resulted in the death of many, right? And then we've also seen that like China has been seen to hold leverage over countries in exchange for other things, such as like land to build military, an example of the BRI. And then like we also see historically China has always been very aggressive to Taiwan. And then now thirdly, what is Taiwan likely to do instead? First of all, I would like to note that the motion insinuates that Taiwan isn't able to provide advanced state service. Note the word advanced. This means that Taiwan is still able to provide services, but it might not just be as advanced as China would be able to. Taiwan would also be able to apply for loans from like international entities, for example, like the International Monetary Funds, who are likely to help because it's an economic disaster. I'll expand on that later. Or they could also, for example, receive aid from allies such as countries like USA. Okay, now onto my first substantive point. Why would China give Taiwan more harm than good if they accepted China's aid in the long term? Okay, some context into this. China is known to be a vicious country that never does anything out of the kindness of its own heart, right? We see that China have a long history of using leverage over country and holding it over their head. They say things like, if you don't let us build on your land, you'll be forever indebted to us, and then they'll like start war with them, using their strong military force to do this, coercing countries into letting China build onto their land, which is like trampling over their culture, trampling over the people of their country, right? And examples of this is like the BRI. So there's a lot of countries that are developing. We see examples of countries in Africa who owes China a lot of money and have been giving this treatment in their cases, where like China is like building things onto their land and monitoring their every move, which is like extremely disadvantageous, especially for developing countries. And then another context I've said is that like Taiwan used to be a part of China and they broke away and that caused independence. Okay, so what this means is if China were to accept China's aid on the negating side of the house, right, there are some effects to this. China will hold it over them. This means like we see that China's already holding other countries like those in Africa under the control. Country that doesn't even like have anything to do with China. But especially in the case of Taiwan, where it is a country that have geopolitical tension with China, was to ask China for, or to get aid from China, China would have massive incentives and is extremely likely to hold this over Taiwan. Okay, 3 reasons for this. Firstly, since Taiwan used to be a part of China, Taiwan have a great amount of resources that China's want. This, for example, could look like lithium resources that would be extremely helpful to create batteries that is used in AI tech that China desperately wants access to. Okay, secondly, China would like to regain control over Taiwan. They would like to be in control over the government, over the military, which like gives them leeway into one day like retaking over Taiwan and like bringing it back into China again. Okay, thirdly, China is extremely economically driven, and the more land that they can seize, the more power they can have over the government, the easier it is for China to be able to take over the economy of Taiwan, to monopolize the Taiwan's market, right? So these are all extreme incentives for why China would want to take over. Okay. And then, so what are some outcomes of this? Taiwan is going to be continuously under the control of China. This is something that Taiwan obviously don't want, and this is like the reason why they have like already broke away from China in the past, right? But now now instead like China's coming back into Taiwan, they're like taking over Taiwan, and then they're gonna say things like, if you don't give us your land or like allow us to build military onto your land, we'll start war. This can result into 2 things. Either Taiwan don't give in, they don't want to lose their land, obviously, so China's gonna impose strong military power, they're gonna start war, people die. And like obviously we know that more Taiwanese people is gonna die because China have much stronger military power, they have much more capacity, and they're just gonna be a lot stronger within this war. Second option, Taiwan gives in, China like overtakes everything, they build military on their land, they build thing on their land, they take over the economy, and then that just give leeway into China one day like owning Taiwan again, right? This will make the life of Taiwanese people hell. And both of these, in either of these cases, there's gonna be some extremely long-term harms, right? Because like, China is gonna continuously have something that's gonna hold over Taiwanese people. They're always gonna have this advantage over them, right? And then like history is gonna repeat itself, and there's like Taiwanese who already broke away and got independence. Like this is just taking away the independence again. And then we also know that like Taiwanese people, due to the tension, they hate China, right? And this is like rooted deep in their culture because, for example, like their grandparents was killed in the previous war when Taiwan broke away from China, and they have strong generational trauma. So like if Taiwan were to accept Chinese aid, this is gonna result into like 3 things. Firstly, into protests, which create more political tension, which is bad, and it also prevent like Taiwan ability to aid the dying people. They also cause a loss of trust in the government, and then they also are extremely scared of what to come because like of the leverage that China have. Okay, I'll take 1 point now.
Does the bequesting of subsidies from the CCP have to mean the provision of soldiers or military personnel onto Taiwanese land?
Okay, I've given incentives to why they like extremely want this, right? Because they want to have military power over Taiwan. But even if they don't, they'll like go into it into the future. And I've given all incentives for this in my points already. Okay, on to my second point. Why does outside of the house actually result in better outcomes when dealing with earthquake? Okay, context of this is that like, as I said, the info slide clearly stated that like the Taiwan government may not be able to provide advanced services. But what this means is they still be able to provide services. So like people is not gonna all die. Okay, if Taiwan were not to accept China's help, it is reasonable to think, right, they're still able to provide like reasonable state services to a level. So this may look like a smaller quality of doctors on dispatch compared to China, or like a little bit of less resources, but not everyone's gonna die. And then Taiwan obviously have the incentive to try their best to like help as much of their people as possible. And then secondly, Taiwan can also get help from other countries that are economically strong, such as the USA, but there's a crucial difference between getting help from the USA rather than China, because USA have no incentive to like monopolize Taiwan, right? They're just gonna send over their doctors who are skillful rather than sending over the military like China would. Or they could also get like emergency loans from the ECB or IMF, and they're also very incentivized to give them these loans because Taiwan is now in an economic crisis. People are trapped, like business is like overturned, etc. Okay, so now what this means is that Taiwanese government can actually decide what to do for their own local. They know what is best, and they don't have reliance on China. They have independence. The impact of this is extremely long term. It impacts everybody in the country of Taiwan, and there will be no long-term leverage that China have, and this is why I'm proud to affirm. Thank you.
I think
Just speaking also, I'll be doing first speaker and leadership after that.
Yes,
Is that fine? What you doing?
Thank the speaker for their speech. Now welcome up the first speaker of the negating team.
Commencing at 3. The geopolitical balance of the Southeast Asia region lies in great strife amongst the course of this debate from both teams. As first speaker here today of the negating team, I would first like to divulge into what the framing of this conflict really looks like and what the historical tensions are, while defining kind of the symmetrical imbalances that the opposing team has defined. We're also rebutting minor into their case and defining what we believe the benefits of aid are going to be, and also the detriments of the Taiwanese government either not having accepted aid or the proposition of not accepting further aid would look like in this world on the negating side of the house, and why this far greatly outweighs the benefits we've already heard from the affirmative side. I'd first like to divulge on what we think the framing of this conflict looks like. We've heard a lot about kind of military acquisition of China into Taiwan and their Chinese kind of aims deep-rooted from, say, the historical tension of the Chinese-Taiwan relations. We believe this is a complete symmetry over both sides of the house. We don't believe this is an asymmetrical point. We're not trying to redefine the history here. We definitely believe that, no thank you, that's too early. We believe that something like the fall of the Qing dynasty and the Autumn Revolution has definitely had the estrangement of the two cultures and the China's continued inacceptance of Taiwanese sovereignty and over Taiwan as a nation state. We definitely believe this is symmetrical across both cases. But one argument we persistently hear is this will lead to greater geopolitical deterioration and the possible invasion, like the possible military conflict, like we're seeing like the Russo-Ukrainian war, or potentially in other conflicts we'll hear like the possible invasion of China and the seas of land. And we've also heard the comparative arguments between no, thank you. We've also heard the comparative arguments between China's involvement in sub-Saharan Africa as well. So we've heard these factors, and I would frame what does this really look like? We want to frame this aid as this is very much. We want to frame these tensions. This is very much also not just as Chinese. Taiwanese relations, but it's also very much a proxy war almost status between China and its ongoing relations with the US as well, and where Taiwan almost acts as a vehicle within this province with the determinations of kind of Western liberalist values in the Southeast Asia region. And we'd just like to establish this, but also aid in this case, at least how we'd frame it, as a counter model to what's being imposed by the affirmative side, we believe is very much like a loanable transfer or like an actual cash outlay of either indirect or direct subsidies. We believe this is likely not going to be on a very long run timescale. We're going to believe this is likely a short-term dependency on payouts until things are rebuilt, such as like the relation was in like how an advanced economy copes with infrastructural disrepute and disrepair compared to, say, the effects on a developing country like they've emerged, which we haven't really seen any scaling or any implementation of this. We don't believe it's likely going to be loanable funds. We acknowledge that Taiwan, I'll take that point of information.
Why didn't the Taiwanese government not just take loans from corporations like the IMF?
Well, I'd like further not to this knowledge. IMF is not a corporation, it's an international banking, central banking, fractional reserve banking system. But fundamentally, why do we believe this withdrawal of loans is better when we acceptance? Well, I'd first like to divulge this into our main points. Why do we believe loanable funds? Well, we believe with any sound, prudent fiscal decision, the acceptance of what's likely to be subsidies in this case, or cash outlays, whether that be indirect or non-direct. We don't believe this looks like men on the ground and like soldier positioning. We don't believe this looks like military positioning or the use of like doctors and we think this looks like the use of like direct payouts to like banking systems in Taiwan, which will likely to flow into greater effects to the Chinese government for the repair of infrastructural systems, and which will likely have. And now I'd like to divulge mainly onto our main points here today. What are our main paths of victory, and what has the greatest impact both on our stakeholders, both on the Taiwanese people and the Taiwanese province, but also on the Asian continent and also on a global scale? Where do we believe what is the truthful and what is the fair option for humanity in this instance. And we'd like to believe, firstly, speaking in terms of Taiwan, we believe the economic benefits outline that China has a vested interest in. We believe this is symmetrical across all sides of the house, but we believe this economic interdependence, one might be effective, like, if this for keeping these relations more positive, as it creates an interdependent trade relationship in this context. But we believe this is very much a detriment economically for Taiwan. We believe, yes, while they may not be able to provide advanced social services in the short term, we believe this doesn't compare to the greater macroeconomic implications as we see what does this look like. Well, what I'd first like to characterise and frame what are the market dynamics and what are the dynamics of Taiwan as a nation state for its economy. Well, we believe Taiwan, like New Zealand, is very much an export-dependent price taker and also import-dependent model with very little primary and kind of pastoral industries. We believe it's very much dependent on import payments from alternative nations, such in the West, but we also believe it's very export dependent. And what do we believe this export dependency, particularly on the likes of electronics, which are pivotal in the Western world for the development of computer systems? It's mentioned AI technology. We agree, we don't disagree with this, but we just believe it's a symmetrical argument. But we believe our side of the house benefits this greater today, and this also has international implications as well, because what occurs when this infrastructure is reduced? What occurs when you have the failure of like port systems, of roading infrastructure? Well, this imposes greater inhibitive costs for exporting firms in Taiwan, which we believe, like the main export, or we believe we can frame this as really, without like using precise data, we can frame this as a large proportion of these goods are internationally traded commodities, such as like semiconductors, which have a high international importance. So what we believe this does, it raises importers' costs, exporters' costs, and therefore the value that they're making on the exports will actually reduce, which will result in a greater price inflation, potentially internationally in these countries, and technological developments, which will slow international growth as well, simply because of the high dependency, particularly the West has with its already existing trade barriers with China as another producer of these technologies. And why do we believe this as well? Increase the running costs of variable costs of production for these firms, so therefore they're likely to reduce output in order to implement cost-cutting measures, which will likely result in their goods becoming less price competitive on an international market exchange system, which therefore results in a price inflation of these goods as they become more scarce elsewhere. And like we've seen, countries like America already have on-existing trade embargoes with other likely substitute producers such as the USA. So we believe economically this is a very tense situation for the technological market and its great implications on macroeconomics in the world today. We believe likely this will also be worsening for Chinese industries as we don't get the circular flow of cash flows in the Chinese economy, the Taiwanese economy, as a consequence of this. And simply, this will also decrease like the import dependence. As imports will become more proportionally costly, as all relative costs will cause great price inflation in Taiwan separately. And now I'd like to move on to our next main point that we like to frame. We're likely to see that this will actually create, on both sides of the house, we like to result this is like an ongoing Cold War that we've established that it's existed for a number of years. We haven't really seen much direct military action between both sides. And I'd also like to frame as well, like they mentioned the interventions that China's had with like loanable funds and say like the Democratic Republic of Congo, where there's like infrastructure loans have resulted in mass destitution. Why can we assume this is not true in this debate today, whereas it might be in the DRC or in some country like Somalia or something like one, Taiwan has already scaled and very developed GDP growth, so we don't see it as directly as dependent on this exchange of outlay of what we define as likely to be subsidies. So we don't see this indebtment trap occur directly as much, or somewhere like this as compared to like somewhere like the Solomon Islands. So we can kind of disregard this content here. But another important it's not on as longer term of use, and it's likely for more critical infrastructure. Like you see in these countries, say like the DRC, it's for like use on countries with like low political stability, which aren't likely going to use these projects as well. So is that concluding? So basically, this is why we believe that it will lead to a greater deterioration of relations, which my second speaker will mention on why non-acceptance will lead to a greater deterioration of relations. Thank you, audience and adjudicators.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the second speaker of the Affirmative team.
Sorry, can I go back to the
Yeah. It's just...
the first one.
There you go. It hasn't been for less, but you'll be there soon.
Okay.
gonna move it up slightly. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. At the point where the negating team is focusing on the economy and the relationships of international and global scale, we tell you that they haven't brought us any incentive of 1, why China is likely to actually do this, 2, why China will actually, why this economic point is actually really relevant in the debate. We tell you that if you stand for a side of humanity and stand for a side of Taiwanese people and their livelihood, you have to support this motion, stand for side affirming. What will I do for you in my speech? 1, I'm going to go over some rebuttals around the framing, clarification of this. 2, I'm then going to go over some rebuttals I have on this economic point. 3, I'm then going to go just extend off my first speaker's second point on why our side of the house will still get better results or better outcomes when dealing with the earthquakes. 4thly, I will then go on into an extension point if I have time on how accepting China's aid will create tension within the Taiwanese government, within Taiwan and their people itself. Okay, onto the framing of what you need to weigh this debate on. Before I actually get into this, I'll take one POI. Okay, no, going on into my case. Onto now the framing that we heard from negating. What did we hear? They actually agreed with most of our material that came up. At first, they told us they conceded to the fact of the historical impacts and the implications of that. Note, they then told us around this Cold War between the USA and China. We tell you, yes, that still happens, but therefore, if Taiwan does accept this, we tell you that it's going to exacerbate it more. Note, they never actually responded to that from first, which is why we support the Taiwanese government not doing that. What else did we hear? They also told us that the short-term they told us some ideas. The counterfactual on how China will only now just give subsidies to Taiwan. We already told you a lot of incentive reasons why China is not likely to do this. 1, for geopolitical reasons, because China is now closer to Taiwan. We tell you that they're more likely to send over practical aid and tangible aid. Therefore, this probably then means that probably likely because China is very military based, they're most likely going to be sending over military base because obviously this earthquake has resulted in a lot of detriments for that. We tell you that they're probably likely to send over that. We gave you incentive reasons at Jenny as to why this is really bad, because China wants to monopolize because of those incentive reasons that we gave out at first. Note that this wasn't sufficiently responded to on Nick. No, secondly now, on this idea it's just going to be a banking system. We tell you, one, that they're going to be able to get aid from international and the IMF because they note that those actually have positive incentives from Taiwan because now the Taiwanese government now can see that they only have to pay back these loans, and note they don't actually have actual tangible things that they have to worry about because the government probably does care about their people and the livelihood of their people because they actually want their people to feel safe and not have to fear of themselves. Note I will talk more about that in my extension point later on. Okay, now onto this idea of this economic idea and the rotation of the economy in terms of international scale, on importing and stuff. We tell you that if they're not able to tell us why or even give us reasons as the Taiwanese people and how they're impacted, so at their best they get a better cash flow in and out of Taiwan. Note that doesn't actually mean that lives will actually be at stake on their side of the house. That is why that's really bad. Now onto this idea of the Cold War and the intervention. They told us that this doesn't actually happen because Taiwan has a developed GDP and they're not going to be able, China won't do this. We already told you reasons as to why China is likely and the incentive reasons as to do that. They need to respond on this in their case. Okay. Now onto just extending and repeating what my first speaker's second point was on why this outside of the house will still result in better outcomes when dealing with the earthquake. Okay, what then we told you that Taiwan is able obviously to get more outreach and better advanced levels from other, alternative people. We tell you that Taiwan will have the incentive to try their best to have the ability to solve this issue as much as it can. Now, what else does this mean? Taiwan can also get help from other countries, as we've already told you. Therefore, there is a crucial difference between getting help from the USA and China, as we've already said. Why then, this looks like probably incentive reasons, like sending over doctors and stuff that are really skillful, rather than sending and being having military bases posted around the mountain terrain that actually means they feel in a sort of a pre-invasion idea of towards the Taiwanese people. As we've already mentioned, the outcomes of this. One, we don't get a long-term impact on the counterfactual on their side of the house. What that then means is surely they get a really small additional help from China, right? But we tell you in the long term, right, what does that look like? One, it probably looks like really intense pushback from China because they obviously care about geopolitical power and economic stability and economic power over this country. We tell you because of historical reasons they do want that because of the tensions that they've constantly had on Taiwan. Note, we also then believe that China will take extreme measures as we've already seen in Southeast Asia. This probably then looks like actually now enforcing more of their military power onto that, which then in the long term means people are now fearing for their lives because now they actually have this military incentive in their country. Note then that at the end of this, there's comparatively on our side, there's no reliance on China. We tell you that sure they'll still have to pay back other countries and the IMF, but we tell you that the principal level on this is really important for that and just on the practicality that they still will get it. Sure, it may not be as quick, but we tell you in the long term for generations of Taiwanese people and for actually international warfare and the actual place between countries that you should stand for that outcome. Therefore, just let's do a bit of weighing what we have currently right now. We tell you that our side actually has a world where we actually have they were still able to get support, but however we tell you that currently now Taiwan is not having to be indebted to China. They actually are able to be localized and help their people out. Note that their independence is really good, and they're not being held over their heads. They're preventing political tensions, and so forth. Now onto this extension point on how accepting China's aid will create tension within the Taiwanese people. Note, we already gave you a lot of lines of analysis of the tensions and the discourse between Taiwanese and Chinese people. Note, this history is really bad and it's indoctrinated within these Taiwanese people. This means that it's not easily likely to be changed on both sides. Before I continue with my speech, I'll take one POI if there's any. Okay, continuing on with my speech. Okay, now onto this probably means it's rooted deeply within these Taiwanese families, which means that it's very hard to change. Note, why are they likely to get aid? We already told you these mechanisms. I'm not going to repeat those. Secondly, on why Taiwanese people are likely to be cautious of this aid and why their principal value is really highly valued in this debate. One, we tell you that they are very pro-Taiwanese people. For Taiwan, they are for Taiwan. They care about their country. Two, we tell you they already have preconceived and the history build up to this. One, this probably cuts through there very deep. We see this tangibly currently right now and centrally, right through the younger generation of Taiwanese people actively telling the government not to take advice from China because they already know their preconceived history of that. We tell you then, the backlash, on their side will be far greater because people will be outraged by this. Sure, they'll get reassurance from their own government is actually helping them and aiding from these international corporations, as then they're now not having to rely on China because these people have a very large dislike. It's example, calling a Fiji Indian people Fijian, disparity differences are really very localized for Taiwanese and Chinese people. At the end of this, what are we proving on the impacts? Taiwanese people are not feeling vulnerable now. They now feel rightly and safe. They're able to get better outcomes. The Taiwanese government actually has the localized power to actually help them. Therefore, we weigh on scale and on severity. We tell you we won this debate. So proud to vote.
Speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the second speaker of the negating team.
All right, as the second speaker of the negating team, I would like to go over some rebuttal, and then I'd like to reinforce our points, especially on how the non-acceptance of this aid is going to escalate tensions and how there are going to be benefits in this for the Chinese people, and our way is definitely the better way to go. So going on to some rebuttal, the other team, the affirming team have mentioned slightly about how Taiwan can apply for international aid or aid elsewhere. This is going to snub China and make tensions far worse than if they had just accepted the aid. China is not going to like that at all. They've also talked about in the past how China has taken over African countries this way. These African countries are more dependent on China than Taiwan will be. Taiwan already has a good infrastructure before this. They've just been, the earthquakes have just damaged this. We believe that with the aid from China, they're going to be able to come back from this. No. And so basically on the affirmative side of the house, Taiwan is going to not accept this aid and barely be able to make their way out of this and improve their economy again, or they're going to accept aid from someone else and it'll escalate tensions. We'd also like to reinstate the fact that this aid will be monetary wise because first of all this is of less cost for China to directly give this, and also this is a high likeliness of it being accepted. China wants this aid accepted because we agree that China wants control. However, we don't believe that China is going to get control through this aid because Taiwan's going to be able to build up from this. So moving on to what our first speaker has said about the how this is going to raise tensions in this area if it's not accepted. Taiwan is in a precarious diplomatic situation with China. It's always been like that. We've heard the history explained, the fact that Taiwanese people just don't like China. No, over later. So it's just difficult for them to reject aid. Outright rejecting this aid could isolate them from this from China in the global stage, and these minor interactions in this situation, they're going to help improve this tension between the two countries. It's a Cold War situation, and it's small things like this that are going to help the situation make it less tense, which we believe this is going to help people. If you're living in a constant state of tension between two countries, then this is no way to live, fearing war, fearing China. And also, if Taiwan doesn't accept this aid, they can't survive. As we've already heard, Taiwan is a country that fiercely depends on its import-export market. Taiwan needs to get exporting to improve its economy, and I'll go later into how this works. But the people are going to be worse off on the affirmative side of the house. I'd also like to bring up an example. For instance, after World War I, Americans, they aided Germany and this financially, and this improved the tensions between the two countries for the time being. Speaking of world wars, this could turn into World War III if Taiwan absolutely does not accept this aid. China is going to be extremely grumpy. I'll take a POI now.
What are the impacts of China being angry at Taiwan?
Well, we know that China has a large military. We know that China is very powerful. And so actually, on the affirmative side of the house, an invasion of Taiwan is more likely than just accepting the aid. All right, so I'd like to move on to the fact that there are social benefits and the people of Taiwan are going to be affected positively by this because the people are important to the country. And so our first speaker has touched on this, and I'm going to bring it again to you about how this aid will help Taiwan repair the infrastructure, start exporting again, which will bring in a more cash flow to the country. And also Taiwan is not they don't have primary industries, so they're going to have to import their food. The people, they can't survive without food. They need the aid to be able to buy food and to be able to repair infrastructure, get businesses going, and ensure that the people of Taiwan will be able to survive. There's also, as the info slide said, thousands injured or trapped in the mountains. These people aren't going to be helped out without aid from Taiwan. The Taiwanese government is overwhelmed. It doesn't have enough money to support their people. So with the aid, what can the Taiwanese government do? They can afford everything that Taiwan needs to get itself back on track. They can feed their people. They can help those thousands of people that are injured and trapped. And they can resume these state services that are so important to the social and economic well-being of its people. They can reconstruct their infrastructure. As we've said before, Taiwan is not like a third world country. Taiwan has already been in a good place financially and with their infrastructure, and they can get back to this. It's just that this aid is necessary to do that. And when there's a greater cash flow in the economy, people will have more money in general because there'll be more jobs for everyone. There'll be benefits for those who can't work. And so the standard of living is going to be raised in Taiwan back to where it was before, which was amazing. People can afford healthcare, education, proper food, and basically they'll be able to get their way out of this hole, except a POI now.
China has a history of holding leverage over small, vulnerable nations in exchange for geopolitical capital. Why is that harm not exacerbated when, one, Taiwan is literally a part of China, and two, they've had a history of proxy wars?
Okay, Taiwan is not literally a part of China. This has been a very large rift. Also, we don't believe that Taiwan is a small, helpless country in this sense, because as we've already said, they are very independent. They've had a amazing GDP. They do a lot of exporting, and they are they're not at the state where they need funding and funding and funding to build infrastructure. They have infrastructure. They just need to fix it. So we don't believe that China is going to be able to take advantage of them in the same way that it's taken advantage of other African countries. And actually, Taiwan is taking advantage of China by accepting this aid because they need it and they are not going to be harmed by accepting it. So, yeah, the basic, in our case, we can prove that we're going to help the people of Taiwan because they will have greater social well-being, greater physical well-being, greater economic well-being. Also, we've proven that not accepting this is going to rise tensions and put them in an extremely bad place. And whereas the other team has not been able to help anyone, they've just escalated tensions, they're unable to fix the damage on Taiwanese civilians. And so, in conclusion, the negating side of the house will make Taiwan a better place.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the third speaker of the affirmative team.
starting my speech. In 3, 2, 1. There's many tensions in this debate, both between China and Taiwan, and in negating's case. One, on the attention of Taiwan's actual capacity, right? Because are they powerful? Do they have a high GDP? Or has this earthquake like completely eradicated any possibility for like rehabilitation above that? Which one is it? Because it seems like negating wants to switch back and forth. The second tension they have within their case is around China's ability to be nice, right? Because for some reason they want to claim that there's a lot of tension like with China, and there's a lot of like proxy wars, and China like has been very mean to Taiwan in the past. We're unsure as to why they're not likely to be mean in this instance, right? Okay, 2 things I'm going to chat to you about today. Firstly, on China's like incentives and their capacity to actually overthrow, the Taiwanese like government and to be able to like impose their own rule on them. And then lastly, on like the impacts on Taiwanese people. Okay, so firstly on China's incentives and capacity to overthrow. We tell you that like China wants to take control over Taiwan. Why is this? Well, we tell you that they like note that China by itself, like as a nation, already has tried, like they want geopolitical power in general, right? They want to take, like they want to give like significant amounts of money to nations so that they're able to, leverage that money over them in return for like geopolitical capital, right? We see there's like a history of that, and there's no denying that. This harm is exacerbated when the nation we are talking about today is Taiwan, who has previously had a history of proxy wars, who has previously had a history of, China just overall wanting to get them back like a jealous like ex-boyfriend. We think that also, like China wants control, and they want control specifically over Taiwan's economic resources, which they themselves admit that is extremely valuable to China and is extremely valuable to the world, right? I will take a point before I continue.
Do you not believe that, as previously stated in your case, that real GDP of Taiwan diminishes instantly as the result of a disaster?
Yeah, but you ignore our information about how we can like take loans from like the IMF. We can take loans from like our richer allies, right? And note the material they give us about how China, like in their absolute best case scenario, where like, China does get mad that, Taiwan is working with the US. Still, no, it's worse when you let China actually into your country and have control of your have control over your citizens. Okay, let's look at some of the stuff that they tell us about China, like from first affirmative. They tell us there have been proxy wars, that there is pre-existing tension. Again, I'm not sure if like they're like prepping for our case instead, because it just sounds like, further contributing to the idea that, China would want to overthrow this government because, they again want control, they want that geopolitical power, but it's further exacerbated when a nation like Taiwan, who was previously like a part of them, like, they felt disrespected, and there was like whole war on like, their independence and stuff like that. We think they're likely to want to get them back in an extremely malicious way, and they already have like previous tension from, things like Nancy Pelosi's visit, which like further exacerbated like these harms, right? But then what do they tell us instead about like why they don't have the capacity to overthrow, right? Because note that they say that Taiwan is extremely vulnerable, right? So the only piece of analysis that they really give us as to why China doesn't have the capacity to overthrow is because Taiwan is already is fairly developed, right? But note now they're not, right? They're extremely weak, people are dying, and they are extremely desperate for aid, hence why they have to take loans from the IMF, hence why China would even offer their assistance in the first place. But like, first of all, note that like even if they were fairly developed, it doesn't mean that China's not at least going to try, because when you're China and you have that much political power, like you have that much, power in the world, you don't necessarily take any harm from it other than just like trying to get like your country back, right? Like again, on their point that like their second speaker says that Taiwan will essentially build up from China's aid and it'll essentially act as a foundation. No, they're building down because people are dying and they need to bury all of the people that are dying in these nations. And they're already going through an economic crisis. We think that the info slide and the motion literally underlyingly tells us that, Taiwan is extremely weak, Taiwan is extremely vulnerable. So we think we should weigh this on the metric of China actually being able to take power and take control and exploit that vulnerability, which I think we've sufficiently proved throughout our 3 reasons of geopolitical power, and why it's worse when you put Taiwan as an actor where they have previous history. Okay, then on the impacts of on Taiwanese people, right? Because let's look at, first of all, Chinese aid. We think we have some pretty huge impacts here. So note this. First of all, we said at first about how when you bring more Chinese authority in, they're automatically more able to outnumber you, right? They tell us that this is likely to be granted in forms of loans and things like that. We think that's unlikely when you have to send over doctors and send over healthcare and things like that. But note that even if it is loans specifically that you're sending over, we still think that things like the BRI exist where you can send over loans and then use those loans to further trap these countries into debt. Okay then, what happens when you outnumber people by bringing more Chinese authority in? This involves bringing in actual military power. We've explained reasons as to why it's likely to bring military power, because of 1, protection, and 2, to get people out of the ground. We think that this means that if Taiwan, at the point where they become outnumbered, it means that Taiwanese families, they get shoved out of their homes, they get discriminated against. All of the terrible things that happened between China and Taiwan in the past, history repeats itself. But secondly, we tell you that they're likely to, be planting military bases, right? And this means that, you essentially, corrode the land and stuff, and people get kicked out of their homes. You look outside and it's no longer a beautiful tree, and it's a whole military plant. It's horrible. We think that those are the type of impacts that we can never stand behind. But we also think in terms of economic dominance, in terms of the economy, which they want to claim is such a significant benefit, that they get on their side of the house. We think that again, China has the capacity. China has the incentive to also be economically very dominant in the world, as we've seen with instances like the BRI, where they want to take control of their influence, right? We think from then people lose their jobs, small businesses are no longer standing. The only reason that they give us as to why these impacts are likely to be good on Taiwanese people exclusively in the context of China is because it relieves tensions for some reason. Again, we don't really know why it's necessarily relieving tensions. I think if I had to guess, it may be because you're working together, but again, it's not a teamwork thing. It's probably China inserting their dominance over Taiwan because they have that power and because Taiwan is so vulnerable. And we think that they're extra angry, and we think they're extra able to abuse their power when we feel Taiwan previously screwed you over. So if you are for positive impact on Taiwanese people, and if you are for Taiwanese people just not getting exploited and not being overthrown, we think you should side with proposition.
I thank the speaker for their speech, and I welcome up the 3rd speaker from the negating team.
Rightio. So China thinks that these guys seem to think that China thinks that by sending over foreign aid, they can take over Taiwan, but that is simply not true. An invasion cannot happen. They fail to account for the global superpowers and the bigger picture of geopolitical powers, which our first speaker, Natalie, touched on. This is weighing up this kind of thing with regards to the fact that there is a huge military power known as the West, which just happens to have like an absolute load of nuclear weapons, which Natalie kind of briefly touched on. They have a load of sort of the sort of tensions that already come in, and they already talked about the fact that they receive benefits from the USA. And these kind of talk about these heightened tensions here. And it seems that there's a lot of tensions between both sides of the house with regards to whether this invasion will actually occur, but we're going to clearly prove to you why this invasion won't occur, and that is simply our path to victory. Our other path to victory is by proving that not only we can get through into China, but the positive benefits simply outweigh the negative ones. Another path to victory here, and I'm telling you because there is simply a lot of paths to victory here for the negating side, is we prove that overall it is better, what is better for the Taiwanese people, and what is simply better for the Taiwanese people is by accepting this aid.
POI,
Yeah, I'll take the POI.
how do you, as Taiwan, work with a country that has historically killed and discriminated against your own people?
Look, we simply have to weigh up the pros and cons here, and we need to simply think about the bigger picture here. We've currently got heaps of people already killed in our own country, as referred to in the inflow slide, and we simply have to weigh up here, we need to think about the long-term economic benefits and the long-term geopolitical benefits, and that is why we need to actually work with China, although some might argue that it would be a little bit counterintuitive. Realistically, at the end of the day, we need to weigh up this and look, right, working with China, we need to take that on the head and truly get into it. I also just want to go on to their point of rebuttal here with regards to the IMF and like how the IMF is less likely to like loan, like with regards like the IMF isn't going to loan in a situation where it's like it's a difficult geopolitical situation. They're not going to purposefully offer out a loan. Like when you go to offer out a loan for a house, they're not going to offer you $20 million to build a house that will get no return. So like they're simply not going to loan. So that point from F can easily be shut down with regards to their loan, and they're kind of like counter model there. Coming on, like, you also, their BRI mechanism, like, they didn't go into enough detail with regards to how, like, the BRI is simply going to positively impact the Taiwanese people, which at the end of the day, it's all about the Taiwanese people and the future for them and the overall geopolitical scape. I also just kind of want to, like, briefly touch on, like, the fact that William discussed with regards to, like, past Chinese tensions in the region, and, like, realistically, the Chinese, we need to think about how we can improve on this sort of like value and principle with regards to the fact of moving forward and like putting these past conflicts behind us, which we've proven. I also just want to briefly reiterate Natalie's like point. Yeah, why not?
Why would China put this behind them?
China needs to put these past conflicts behind them to be able to move on in this kind of scheme of things here. Because think about it here, right? After the Second World War, we had a lot of countries that had to put past differences aside in order to work world peace. We need to be thinking about world peace in that situation here. This conflict, as soon as something is rushed in this instance, like the affirming side has argued, we're going to get mass rise in these sort of tensions. I'm just going to come back to Natalie's point here, which was regards to the huge economic benefits we're going to see for the Taiwanese people. Because at the end of the day, our path to victory is proving that it is better for the Taiwanese people, right? And it's like this economic growth with regards to our exports and like our GDP, and kind of flipping that into and like kind of seeing how we can get these positive benefits, which we've been able to prove. I also kind of just like want to touch on the fact that by rejecting the foreign aid, it will literally rise tensions across both regions, right? And it's like this kind of idea that if as soon as you reject it, it's just going to rise tensions not only between like certain allies, but it's actually going to rise it between not only China and Taiwan, which yes, they could argue could lead to an invasion, but realistically an invasion is not likely due to the fact there are huge other powers, and we could literally end in a World War III sort of situation like Natalie touched on there and expanded. And it's kind of this like detriment of like, we've really got to think here. So that point is symmetrical and can be disproven here. This like the other point was like the affirming side's main argument was built on the case of like this whole idea of an invasion, which we've been able to prove an invasion is not likely. Therefore, the positive sides of like accepting this kind of like accepting their like benefit, like their foreign aid from China, would then lead to positive benefits for the Taiwanese people. Like also like when you think about the like Chinese aid could be kind of used as a like tool to try and get in and try and take over their resources, like Af talked about with regards to they had like getting the AI with like in because China really wants AI, and they could try and use it as like a tool, like a political power tool to try and invade. Like once again, that is a huge pragmatic, like you have to think about the pragmatic realities of Taiwan in this situation and like how they can actually improve their overall society, which we've been able to prove. Also, Taiwan is in a very precarious diplomatic situation as it is, and the world is in a very tight and tensious situation, just like the debate today between Af and Neg. We're very tensious. But like it makes it really difficult to like outright reject foreign aid, because simply by saying no, we don't want foreign aid, like in the past we've seen, which William talked about, the kind of past ideas, like the foreign aid kind of leading to this sort of cycle. Like sure, Taiwan has rejected foreign aid in the past, and it has been confirmed they reject foreign aid. But what has that simply led to? More heightened tensions, more heightened tensions, more heightened tensions. We simply cannot have that under our model. Also, you can't do that. Once again, I'm going to come back to this whole idea of this invasion, global invasion. Like, realistically, we cannot have this global invasion like William talked about. Let's just kind of come back and like weigh this whole argument up like as a whole, right? Like, realistically, that neg, we've been able to prove that we, like, our overall path to victory is the benefits for the Taiwanese people are huge. And like, second of all, I just kind of want to briefly just before I touch on my second point, I just want to come back to the fact they mentioned something with regards to the fact that their second speaker mentioned Chinese people, like, kind of, Taiwanese people kind of rioting and stuff. But realistically, why do people riot? They riot because of a difficult economic and political situation that they've been put into. And simply by accepting aid, we're going to get out of this challenging economic situation, which will only lead to positive benefits for the Taiwanese people, which therefore means a likely protest is very unlikely under our counter model. Coming back to that kind of second overall like weighing of this, like we've been able to prove that the overall acceptance of sort of this like cross-strait tensions will outweigh and simply bring us up in that point there. Like our third, like kind of, we've got to really weigh that point with regards to aid. Who is it going to benefit most? Is it going to benefit the Taiwanese people as like a little country, or is it going to benefit the whole world and the Taiwanese country? Simply put, under our counter model, it is simply, and our overall principle, it is simply too strong to mention. Now, let's just really think about this kind of big brother, little brother sort of situation here. Simply rejecting aid is almost impossible under both sides. Like, you simply cannot reject a foreign aid. By simply saying no, the tensions are absolutely increasing, and you cannot see this kind of like positive benefit. Like, also, I just want to come on, like, realistically, like a dozen deaths, like the affirming side talked about, like how a dozen deaths, like, does not prove a problem for like bearing people. Like, that simply just doesn't make sense in the whole like logic scheme of things, because realistically, by killing 2 people won't lead to an absolute genocide, which seems like it's kind of leading to on this side of the house here. Also, as said, the injured are the people that need help. They're the people that are currently caught, and they need hospitals, and they're currently stuck in this kind of shortfall, which Natalie talked about with regards to economic benefits here. We need to be thinking about how we can improve this overall economic benefit, and we need hospitals, we need schools, we need all this sort of stuff, which currently Taiwan's infrastructure is heavily damaged, and we need to be able to improve on that. Last of all, I'm just going to briefly say that a decline in the balance of trade, right, it's going to impact our global market, and like the shortfall of countries will be huge. But basically, at the end of the day, non-acceptance worsens cross-strait tensions, which will simply lead to a catastrophic outcome for the Taiwanese people, which is why I'm very proud to negate. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
I think the speaker for their speech, as is customary, will reverse the speaking order and have the negating apply.
Okay. Yeah, I've got a couple of papers here. Okay. Adjudication panel. What do you believe over the case of today's debate has seen a more realistic impact, and what has proved the greater path to victory? This is what I will be reiterating in my reply to this debate as a representative of the negative team. What provides greater and broader outcomes, unlike the diminishing marginal return we've only seen, which is very dependent on the analytical burden that they have imposed on themselves based on this horrendous chance of invasion that we've heard consistently pushed throughout their speech. We've heard emotional pleas about, say, the killing of people, the mass burial of people. We've heard about mountainous defence. We've heard a number of factors like the imposition of Chinese lithium mining. But on our case, we've heard several main aspects, such as mainly economic interdependence between China and Taiwan, but we've also heard why the political stigmatisation and the current balance of global relations, which has been insignificantly considered by the opposing team, they've narrowed their case to only examining the Southeast Asia region while ignoring our implications for the wider global economy, but also its spillover effects into wider economic and political tensions on a global scale, which we believe are far greater in the long run effects for these people, aside from their possibility, the only possibility, this is only the possible cause that invasion does occur, while we've proven you the benefits with aid, regardless of whether the implementation of it occurs, which will eventuate. Their whole case is based on the likely and unlikely probability that this invasion does occur based on the marginal inacceptance of aid and what it occurs. We see this, we've defined you throughout this case as I characterised in my first speech, which was blatantly ignored. We characterised this as likely on both teams having symmetrically a very marginal effect in terms of relations between China due to the fractured historical nature of this conflict. We don't believe that this, something say greater, we believe that there are far greater, like we've seen far greater things that may have a greater geopolitical impact, such as the positioning of Chinese naval fleets near the coast of Taiwan. We're seeing this is very on that similar marginal scale like we've discussed. We've discussed that on the geopolitically, that this is on a, at least their alternative, what they have not considered is, yes, while the consequences might be dire, they are of a lower probability of occurring simply because of the analytical burden imposed on their case from trying to prove the argument that this will actually occur as a result of the outcomes, while they have frequently ignored the effect. They have not mentioned really any, I am not seeing any valid response aside from one point mentioned briefly at second affirmative that, because the Taiwanese, as mentioned in the information side, were so vulnerable because of the effects of it will decline our GDP. They've said we've played it around. They've been playing around with it for the entire debate. It's been a very cat and mouse interpretation by the opposing team, and I'd frankly like to say, while, yes, this, I'd just like to briefly respond on this. We believe that the economic positioning here, one argument has been that they'll use our debt. They've ignored our framing on the basis of, they've tried to say it'd be indebted. They've tried to say the realism of soldiers being brought over. We've given you relevant examples right throughout this debate why the likelihood of subsidisation is the most likely cost for China and the most likely form to be accepted by Taiwan in our side of why Taiwan would accept and what would be offered by China. And we see mainly, why would this occur without being reiterating new content. Why do we see this occur? Well, we see it occurs as Taiwan's willing acceptance of this compared to like a direct cash outlay dependent. We don't see the realism that they accept Chinese soldiers on foreign soil. If they've mentioned the political strife and tensions over the years, what makes you actually think that they would be accepting of these soldiers on their soil, opposed to how we've realistically framed that this change would be implemented? They're bargaining on an unrealistic principle, and this is why we believe we have won this debate, because we've shown why the implications are greater while they have ignored our mechanisms on this repeatedly. They've ignored, I think, one main point of clash which we have won also is the mechanism of how this positive change is implemented. We haven't seen many response to the large macroeconomic implications that my team is at the end of time. Our team has exposed throughout this debate, and this is why we believe, simply based on the burdening of the speeches given here today, that the opposing affirmative team cannot win the case simply based on the cohesive framing and argument on the negative team. This is why I'm proud to stand. Thank you very much.
Affirmative reply to close this debate.
Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. This isn't a debate about just the economy. This is a debate about the lives of the people in the country of Taiwan. Note I say country, well, under the negating side of the house, Taiwan may not even be a country by the end of this. Okay, so I've identified 3 points of clash today. Okay, firstly, on how will China provide aid to Taiwan, right? Secondly, how will Taiwanese people be affected in the acceptance of aid? And then thirdly, is Taiwan able to aid the people without the help of China? Okay, firstly, how will China provide aid to Taiwan? We come up here, the affirming side, I've told you that when Taiwan accepted aid from China, this will create geopolitical tension, and China will seize land and have leverage over Taiwan, BRI system, etc. They come up here, they told us this is not going to happen because like Taiwan is better than African country, they have good GDP, etc. And they also told you that like China is only going to give monetary funding, not physical aid. Okay, what will we tell you? We have told you, we gave several mechanisms about why China have incredible incentives, why they want to physically take over Taiwan, right? They want to have incentive to seize Taiwanese land due to historical reason, the resources that Taiwanese have, and China want to have monopoly over Taiwan's economy, right? And then they also told us that like the money from China is going to be able to help the Taiwanese people. But we have told you that this isn't absolutely necessary. While it is symmetrical on both sides of the house that getting money will help Taiwanese people, the Taiwanese people can get money from other places such as the IMF or through USA, which will also result in the Taiwanese people being helped, but not having the leverage of where Chinese is holding this over them. And that's why we believe we have won on that point. Okay, secondly, how will Taiwanese people be affected by the acceptance of aid, right? They tell us that like without the aid, like there's gonna be an economy crash, etc., which will affect Taiwanese people. Okay, we tell you that like there's been huge geopolitical tension between the Taiwanese and Chinese people. They're not gonna want to accept help from people who like killed their grandparents, who previously made their life hell, and then they don't want to accept the aid when now they're going to be constantly living in fear or scare of the leverage that China have over them. Okay, now on to the final point about whether Taiwanese is able to aid the people without the help of China, right? My third speaker correctly pointed out the tension within the case. They say that Taiwan is like super weak and require the help of China, and then the second time they say that like Taiwan is super strong and now can resist China attempt to overtake them, and that like etc. So first of all, there's a tension, which means that they can't both simultaneously be true. But what we have been able to tell you is that like Taiwanese, without the help of China, either they can provide like sufficient, like some decent state of service to their own country, or they can get funding from IMF, ECB, or they get help from USA, who none of them have the incentive to take over Taiwan. They all have incentives to like actually help Taiwan. To respond to this, they tell us this is going to annoy China, increase tension, cause war. Okay, they gave us literally no mechanism on why China would even do this out of nowhere. Meanwhile, we gave several mechanisms on the harm that will occur if Taiwan did take China's help, right? But let's say, even if like China did like create war out of nowhere, our third speaker have clearly told you, like, is it worse if China's trying to start war with you, or if China is in your country and start with war within your own country? That will be much, much worse on their side of the house, right? And then overall, we say that like either they can get help from the USA, who's not like corrupt and trying to kill them overall. Okay, at the end of this, we tell you that we win on the scale. We win on the metric of scale because it affects the entire country of Taiwan. We win on the metric of severity and the long-term impact, where China no longer have this like leverage that they're holding over Taiwan overall. Okay, but even if at the end of all this, you don't believe that like Taiwan is able to get help from USA or etc., but like we still tell you that like we are able to sufficiently prove that if China were to aid Taiwan, they will hold this over them. Geopolitical tension will be even worse, which will affect Taiwan overall. And then we weigh that this is important above all, as it affects all the people, all the Taiwanese people for the rest of their life. And that's why I'm proud to affirm. Thank you.
I thank the speaker for their speech and everyone for a great debate overall. We'll head outside now.
Sorry. Oh my goodness.
No, you're all good. You're all good.